Welcome to Wise Heads, where some of the sharpest minds in business share practical thinking to help you build a better business and make better decisions. This week, I'm delighted to be joined by Georgina Milne. Over the past 18 months, George has been working deep inside the world of frontier technology in Silicon Valley, helping founders develop brand strategies and positioning for businesses, building everything from advanced AI to humanoid robots. And that creates some fascinating challenges. What happens when your client is a 25-year-old genius building something most people barely understand? How do you develop a strategy when the product is still largely an idea? How do you make incredibly complex technology meaningful to ordinary humans? And as technology makes it easier for every brand to look increasingly polished, how do you create one that actually stands out? George, thanks for joining me.
Thank you so much, Adam, for having me. Looking forward to the conversation.
Take us into this world. What kinds of businesses and founders have you found yourself working with over the past 18 months?
The past 18 months, I have really dived quite deep into the world of frontier tech and emerging tech, largely based out of Silicon Valley. My background is strategy, brand strategy, so positioning, naming, tone of voice, narrative. Most of the work I've been doing recently has been in the States, so working with companies like humanoid in-home robotics, quite a few AI-led robotic companies, lots of self-recursive or next-generational AI SaaS products or platforms, lots of consumer tech, nuclear fusion, and also with the VCs that fund these businesses.
How are these types of businesses finding you? Here you are down in New Zealand. How are you on their radar?
95% of it is existing networks. So people that I have worked with in the past, and I work directly into some clients, but I also work quite often into design studios or creative teams, other independents. So it's through their relationships as well. I was based in the UK for a really long time and did a lot of work across the States as well. And I think that's just where my network is. Recently, I had someone in New Zealand contact me. There was this nuclear fusion business via an agency. And that was the first time that I've kind of been able to marry up the sector that I love working in, kind of emerging tech, but then geographically something that felt closer to home, which was really nice. I got to spend a lot more face time with people in rooms, which I don't often get to do because most of my work is all online and at weird hours across time zones.
You've joked that nothing makes you feel stupid, quite like dealing with 25-year-old geniuses all day. What are these founders actually like to work with?
Sometimes the ability to grasp the technical nuance of some of, whether it's self-recursing AI or something like that. I don't have a technical background. And I think that's part of the benefit I can bring. It's real objectivity. The stupidity helps the process, but it can be humbling. What is it like to work with these young founders? What I'm finding really interesting is that I'm about 20 years into my career, and I think you spend a lot of time, or I did at least, learning the language of business. And we talk a lot about making sure that marketing has a seat at the C-suite table. I've always worked in design environments, so it's how do we speak the language of business to make sure that design lands with credibility within this more commercial environment. Your clients are always these older white men called John, often, that's the vibe. And I've spent 20 years emulating that language and that tone and that posture. And now all of a sudden, you're working with people who are younger than I am. And a lot of them, not all of them, they're intentionally very anti-bureaucratic. They don't want to look or speak or sound or operate like existing big businesses. So they're actively pushing against that. So you need to find a new language to connect. Cultural context is quite different. And I think we've seen that in the tech landscape with people like Elon Musk. They're building these quite dystopian businesses, products, things that feel very hard-edged and sharp and frightening because that was the kind of cultural context that they grew up in. That was the era of Terminator. And what I've loved seeing is that the founders I'm working with are younger. They are looking at different types of references, at anime and the Jetsons and things that bring more personality and color and diversity to, I think, what the tech space currently looks like. I spend a lot of time on TikTok trying to understand Gen X cultural environment, I suppose. I don't do content strategy, so it doesn't land in my work, but I think it's just trying to stay within the kind of understanding of what their mind space looks like for the founders I work with. They don't have a CMO, they don't have a marketing department, they don't have a marketing head. They might have a chief of staff, more often than not, I'm working directly into the founders, and they're brilliant. They might be ex or current academics, they might be engineers, they might be entrepreneurs, but most of them don't have a marketing background. And so again, it's about breaking down principles that if you've worked in marketing or brand for a long time, you just understand to be true. You need to start with 101 principles and make it understandable and compelling and do all of that at pace, because the projects move really, really quickly.
You mentioned that these young founders are very deliberately trying to not be big business. Why is that?
There are a few different reasons. Part of it is some of the younger founders I've worked with have a very strong moral compass that is driving the goals of their business. They're very impact driven. And I think they look to some of the benchmark tech founders. And we've had this conversation really explicitly. It's, can you deliver brilliance and impact in the world and not be an arsehole? And there are no benchmarks for that.
Where do you find a lot of these founders tend to have blind spots? Like, what can somebody understand about their world but completely miss about building a brand?
A lot. But again, it's they don't have a branding background. You're not working with CMOs. So there is that whole education piece that you do need to do around differentiation, around distinctiveness, around memorability, around building emotion. Obviously, if you are creating cutting edge tech, you assume that people care about the technicalities, the nuance, the features and benefits. I would argue that's the same with most clients, though, that you have to elevate them out of that and you have to talk to them about telling their story, finding their impact. What's the human value within all of this? I think another big blind spot is timelines, about how long it takes to answer some of these big questions. If you're asking people, what is the truth of your business? What do you want the long-term impact to be? How are you meaningfully different from other people in market? They are not answers that you can quickly find. And it's not just from our end. Often it's things that they need to sit with internally. And if they're a new business, they haven't asked these questions before. And you might have very conflicting viewpoints because the founding team might be an academic, an engineer, and the commercial brain. The timeline is there to allow for those conversations to happen within the business and to find that alignment where you can. And I think because a CEO can vibe code a new website over a weekend, they look at a timeline of even 3 weeks for a strategy sprint and they say, we don't have that time. It's not as much for our work. It's for the space for them to sit with some of these bigger questions. Founders underestimate how long it takes for them to question the intent of what they're there to do.
When might a founder recognize they're at the stage in their business where they need to bring in someone from the outside to help them with some of that thinking?
A lot of the clients I'm working with at the moment, they are pre-product. So they've been handed millions, tens of millions. They might be ex-Anthropic or ex-Google DeepMind. So they're in a unique position where they are able to build a company with this investment backing. And I work with them because they need to tell the world that they exist. They don't have a product, they don't have much of a team, but they have a vision and they have perhaps the beginnings of a tech stack. So at that point, they really know that they just need something to signal to the market that they exist. That might be, a very light design strategy. It might be a founder's memo and then an identity and a website. It can vary a lot. I think in most cases for startups, a lot of them will have a version of a brand that exists and they will realize that it's underselling their capability. It's not distinct enough in market. People don't recognize who they are, that their customers aren't who they thought they would be. There isn't the right product market fit, or that it's just not sophisticated enough to tell the story as they've grown. And as hopefully their revenue increases, their user base increases, they realize that it's time to reinvest in brand. For bigger businesses, there's a lot of people investing in brand at the moment because they want to tell the story of their AI capability. So a lot of SaaS platforms, consumer tech, a lot of the professional services businesses I work with now have this AI adjunct to what they do, and they need to tell the world that they are as future focused as everyone else in the market. So I think a lot of money is being spent telling those stories as well.
You've described developing strategies for businesses where the product is sometimes little more than a well-funded idea. Where on earth do you start?
It's usually the same place you start for any other business. I will always do a fairly robust discovery phase, and I will generally do the 4 C's. So you look at the company, what exists of it, the competitor set, their customers or users, and then the context that they operate in. And I look as broadly as I can across those things about anything that does exist. I play it back. The point of that session is to find my own blind spots, because they will always be the expert in what they do, and you're not going to change that. But you need to get on the same page really quickly. So that's the role of that discovery phase. And then you get into the framework. For a really nascent business, some of the biggest questions we put to them are, who are you? What is your personality? And they haven't had those conversations. And again, when there's different founders coming together to be part of the founding team, there can be quite different perspectives of a potential business personality.
Where do you find the evidence to inform those discovery phases?
Absolutely, whenever possible. I try and bring in the voice of the customer in whatever way you can. Marketing 101 says you are not your customer. And I think there are a lot of company founders that is news to them, and you forget that they do need to be told that there is different perceptions about them, or zero perceptions about them in market. So you find different ways to bring in that voice of the customer. If the startup is really nascent, I try and shadow conversations they have with VCs, or I get feedback on, we see different narrative ideas, different value props. How is this landing in the room? What was their reaction to that? Because VCs might be their only audience at that point. When they have actual customers, then it's market sizing if you can unlock budget to do proper research, which is always my ideal. And if you can't, then it's any other quant, qual, surveys, any anecdotal understanding. I spend a lot of time on Reddit trying to understand the viewpoint of real users or real customers, if you can find that online. Any way to disentangle, I think, the founder's understanding of what their business is and the market's perception of it.
In that situation, what are you actually positioning? The product they have today, the company they want to become, or the future they believe is coming?
All of the above, across different deliverables and sometimes across different phases of the project. It depends on the client. Some of them have a very clear perspective on why they're doing this, but they don't have a product yet. And so you lean into that. And others have a product or a tech stack or something close to being able to ship, but they haven't got any sense of what product market fit might look like, what audience they want to push into. It depends where in the product lifecycle these companies are, but I'm writing a lot of founders memos at the moment, because it is that moment where they're launching to the world and they don't necessarily have a product to point to. In the background, I am helping them validate and shape what that product and then go to market might look like. But at that initial point of time, they are just a vision. And so they need help crafting that and finding a way in that feels differentiated and compelling to future users, but again, more often than not to VCs and analysts and tech community. So I do think it's all of the above.
How do you tell the difference between a genuinely powerful vision and a very compelling story about something that may never happen?
It's an internal struggle and question I ask myself when I'm deep in the work. But with a bit of perspective, I don't think it matters, because every new product or business or innovation sits somewhere along that spectrum. They all hope that it's going to be this incredibly powerful new breakthrough technology. Not all of them will. You just have to support the founders or the business as best you can with the vision that they have. The one thing I do say a lot to founders is, the bigger the promise, the bigger the burden of proof. Because I think if you go to market and you say, there is nothing like us, this is revolutionary, then people want that backed up with proof points. And that's really important. And that's part of my job, to make sure that the story that sits underneath that headline actually ladders up and makes sense. There's data, there's proof points, there's testimonials, there's behind the scenes footage, there's research papers, whatever you can access. I would never want to launch a client into market with this huge claim that could immediately be pulled apart. It's just ensuring that you support the boldness of their vision, but make sure that they are ready to backfill that with proof.
Can brands overcome that proof and be a shortcut to making something true?
No, I don't think so. This is something I've dealt with a couple of clients really recently. Huge amounts of vision and grit and excitement for the businesses that they were creating, but very little in terms of actual product that sat behind it. And you do not want to create a brand that doesn't live up to the vision. Hype cycles can kill a business so quickly. And there have been, particularly in robotics and some of the sectors that I work in, there have been too many examples of launches that fall flat. Companies are found out too quickly. And I think if the product doesn't match the brand and the customer experience doesn't live up to the promise, I genuinely don't think that the company has an ability to succeed. That's the same with any sector. Even if you work in consumer goods, I think clients presume that their launch is going to be game-changing. And they have to act like it is because they've had to build a business case internally and they've accessed budget and they're building this brand for a new drink or wellness good. Good founders have to have an insane level of belief in what it is that they're doing. And I think that transcends sectors. Have there been some founders that I've worked with that I question whether the proof sits there behind the brand? Possibly, but then their pedigree or their background suggests that they are capable of doing something incredible. And I think if you're a founder that has accessed 65 million from a VC, simply on the value of where you have currently worked or what you have done in previous environments, that engenders some level of faith from me that you can replicate that success again.
If you're working with someone who believes they've got a genuinely disruptive or completely game-changing idea, how do you work with those sorts of businesses or founders to get them to first make a strategic choice about what they should stand for first?
Unfortunately, there is always this idea with founders that build it and they will come. I've created this incredible breakthrough, and the minute the world finds out about it, I'm rich. And I think there is so much more to building a brand and building awareness, what that sort of conversion funnel looks like, and the odds that are stacked against smaller players across distribution, across awareness, across any measure of potential success. Companies can be undereducated or under-equipped in terms of how challenging the road ahead is going to be. Our role is to be really clear about the market context that they're operating in.
How do you build a positioning with enough certainty to mean something when the technology underneath it could have completely changed within 6 to 12 months from now?
Everyone talks about taste and judgment and that being the current marker of why people would invest in human talent rather than AI talent. I personally think the future of where strategy and creative and solid human-led strategy, what it needs is specificity, because I think that's what all the LLMs and AI can't give you. It can give you something that makes sense, but there's no specificity around who the company is and what they do well. Branding is about understanding what the business is at its center and trying to create something as timeless as possible. And then the way that meets customers can flex, but the core of the brand needs to be built around why that business exists. And that should withstand technological changes to a certain amount. That's the point of brand. You build something that can withstand market dynamics and tech changes certainly over the year ahead. And then it's up to your brand comms and your experiences and all of the other touch points to flex in line with what consumers need at that time. So I don't actually think it's changed. Even though the rate of change is speeding up, brands still need to be built to be relatively timeless and enduring.
When you're dealing with technology that most people struggle to understand at all, what have you learned about simplifying something without dumbing it down too much?
It's all about finding the human truth or the human impact. Technology, really, it's about what it enables. And one of the clients I worked with was a robotics company building in-home robots. And their name is brilliant. The name is Sunday. And I think that is so evocative of what it is that they enable. It gives you your Sunday back so that you can chill and hang with family and you're not doing your jobs because this robot is doing it. And the positioning that we created for them was life made lighter. And so you have this new tech in your home and it can unload your dishwasher and it can pick up your kids' toys and shoes. But the point isn't the technology, it's what it enables for you. So it's the same across sectors, but it's what is that real human kind of benefit? What's the thing that feels compelling and memorable and resonant from a very human perspective? Why is it exciting? What can it do for them?
Do founders of a new product within a category sometimes struggle with simplicity because they're closer to it and they want everyone to understand as much as they do?
Regardless of what type of business I'm working for, the key thing I will do is define the what, how, and why. And it has to fit inside a tiny little box so you can only get one sentence, maybe 6 to 8 words tops for each of those areas. What do you do? How do you do it? Why does it matter? And strategy is sacrifice. And you lose a lot of really interesting, compelling ideas in that exercise of getting to what, how, and why. But it's critical because without that prioritization exercise, you do end up with founders who tell the world about the kind of technical nuance of whatever the product is, and people don't care. And I think there's been a big learning in brand and marketing in the past 5 years or so. Customers don't care about your brand. They can only remember 2 or 3 key positioning pillars, work out what those things are, and repeat them ad nauseum. So you are beyond bored of them. And think about the conversion funnel, and you can tell all of those detailed specs and features, benefits at the very back end, at the conversion point. But you have to lead with story, and you have to lead with emotion. You have to lead with the why. So you start by getting them like distilled into those tiny little boxes.
Let's say you have a founder who truly believes they have 5 or 6 key reasons why their product is different from every other product. How do you get them to narrow that down to the number of front runners you believe you should be anchoring a brand around?
So it depends if they're stepping into a market where there are competitors that already exist. You look at who's owning what and where there might be white space to play. You have to look at the customer perspective. So understand what the market dynamics are and what competitors are trying to own. And then you look at what customers care about. And so often it's as simple as going out and talking to them and finding out that the thing that they're really looking for isn't the thing that you wanted to lead with. Voice of the customer can unlock so much of that stuff, and it's just so underutilized that you can use Reddit. If you have budget, you can do proper market research, but sell something that people want. And often it's not the thing that you expect.
What's the shift that takes a story from, look at this extraordinary technology we've built, to here's why this matters to you?
You define the brand idea or the brand narrative, big idea, design idea, whatever you want to call it, that compelling idea that sits at the heart of what it is that you're building. And it is inherently evocative and inherently emotional and led by story, and you can build narratives around it, but it needs to be true. We talk a lot about that idea of balancing authenticity with aspiration or ambition, making sure that you've landed in the right ballpark so that it can grow with the company, but it also feels true and it feels accurate. So I think if you nail that brand narrative, that brand idea, that is your way in to what needs to sit on the website. You're telling an emotive story from the get-go. It can inform literal brand campaigns. It can inform UI of the site. It can inform experiences, everything else. The minute you elevate the way that founders think about their company from a set of product features and specs to helping them understand what that big compelling idea is, they can take that and run with it. But often that is the piece that they're missing and they don't even know that they need.
You've written a lot about how companies end up sounding remarkably similar. Why does that happen? Is it laziness, fear, groupthink, or something else?
In branding, people have always flocked towards conventions. Often when people look the same or speak the same, it's because they haven't done the work to understand why they're different. They haven't spoken to customers to understand what people really appreciate about their business or what their value is. They haven't looked deeply at the competitor set to see if they have any kind of key tenets that they can differentiate on. Sometimes it's also because leadership aren't interested in brand or marketing. And so the people that own the vision for the company and have a really clear point of view that could inform a different positioning, a different tone, different identity in market, don't understand its importance. So you're left with a head of marketing who doesn't have access to that vision, but also doesn't have the remit to make bolder decisions.
Is emulating a category leader within the tech industry also not a bit of a shortcut? I mean, you think about Apple, how all of a sudden everyone started showing up with white backgrounds.
I think it absolutely is. And for some clients, it's a really smart move if they are really early in their life cycle and their key audience is a VC. They have to use the conventions that exist in the space because VCs aren't going to spend excess time understanding that looks, smells, feels totally different and outside the realm of what they're actually willing to buy. It makes sense sometimes for customers to exist within a set of conventions, but I think we know enough about the importance of distinctiveness for a brand over time that when you're building a brand, understand what the conventions are, know what you need to leverage for particular audiences, and then make sure that you've got enough distinctiveness baked in so that the brand knows where its evolution is going and what it looks like. So as they start speaking to more end users, they know what that looks and feels like for them.
What's the difference between being distinctive and being different?
I feel like it's the biggest debate of our time, right? And it depends if you love Ritson or if you love Byron Sharp. You'll fight one way or the other. I might be wrong around what the definitions are and more around how important it is to both be distinctive and differentiate. I believe distinctiveness is looking and feeling and acting different in market. So you are clearly yourself, memorably yourself in market, even though you often may not be hugely differentiated or different from your competitors. I think you aim for both when you can. And I think that's absolutely Ritson's perspective, that any opportunity to differentiate, you should. But I have absolutely worked with sectors where there's very few opportunities to differentiate. Things like insurance. That doesn't mean that the brand can't be distinct and have a very specific position in market, even if the underlying product is arguably equivalent to its competitors.
Some of the most successful technology companies, certainly in my observation, seem to convince people that a future that they're promising is inevitable long before it arrives. How much of a strategy is actually helping people believe in a future that doesn't yet exist?
It's a really interesting question and a really important question, and something that I think a lot of emerging tech is getting really wrong. They've rushed to almost assuming that everyone wants the same future. Thinking about robotics, and you see these uncanny valley campaign concepts or brands where they put a humanoid robot walking amongst us, either in your home or in an office environment, and project this idea that this is normal and wanted without doing any of that work around how do people actually want this new technology to show up in their world, in their home, in their environments. There's just this massive assumption and leap to the endpoint of this is what the world will look like that consumers are starting to push back against. I think AI is exactly the same. Anthropic have done a pretty good job about outlining their different visions for what a future might look like, and even opening up that conversation that there are different versions of, and some feel better for humanity than others, I think has engendered a lot more trust for Claude and more broadly for Anthropic than for some of the other AI leaders who, again, seem to make this assumption that they are doing something for humanity that everyone is agreed with and on board with, and they haven't done enough storytelling around the benefits. There's very few interesting new versions of what that future looks like. What I've noticed working with a lot of tech companies is that the visual references and the cultural references are all very similar. So everyone read Asimov. Everyone watched the same sci-fi films growing up. It's the same dystopian meets abundant earth visual architectural world that they kind of align to. And I think that's something I'm excited about with a newer cohort of founders coming through. I'm hoping that we get a more diversified viewpoint of what the future actually looks like. Because from a purely aesthetic perspective, there's real convergence of what this future looks like. And it's something that sci-fi writers were crafting 60 years ago. And there doesn't seem to be anyone creating a different version or a different visual outside of that. I'm excited to see what that looks like. Some of the brand strategies or the design strategies that I write try and push for that nuance and difference and true creativity around what this future world might look like.
In the tech space, maybe 2 years ago, maybe a little bit less, we would see AI mode now available, or now with AI was a big push. Do you feel like we've already plateaued and we're now heading back down towards where human is going to be seen to be premium and special? Are we already becoming fed up with AI as our customer service representatives on websites, for example?
You're right that customers are already pushing against ineffective AI and a desire for more human tactility and access to people. I think that will continue. It's a slower burn, but I think the generation coming up behind us are going to require that even more. There's a real pushback against AI across a lot of use cases. I do think there's implications. Large organizations are held together by the intellect and the instinct and the expertise of their people, and I don't think anyone's telling that story very clearly or even trying to at all. And I think there's a massive opportunity there across a lot of sectors to go back to what makes them unique, and often it is the people behind the tech.
There's a theory that very soon in the not too distant future, purchase decisions will be made for us by these various AI agents. Is that something that tech founders are thinking about?
Yeah, companies are definitely thinking about that, about how and whether they should restructure either company portfolios, their brand architecture, their website UI to be better found and served by agents, how to pivot the way that they service their brand and market to better serve agents. That's definitely happening. I've been part of some of those conversations, but those things take a long time to work through. What the balance is and what it should be. Who are we serving first and why and how? I think a lot of the tenets of good brand building sustain though, whether you're serving an agent or a person. And I like to think that, again, it'll just come down to being more clear around who you are and what you're doing and why you're doing it and where your value is. I think if you can serve that to a person, you can serve it to an agent.
What's more important right now for businesses? Being found or being chosen?
It has to be being chosen, but only if the numbers mean that, enough people are finding them then to be kind of qualified down to choose them. I don't think you can necessarily disentangle them, but a business isn't going to survive if they have huge awareness but no conversion. You have to sell the thing.
I love the contrast you described. You spend your day writing narratives about self-accelerating AI and humanoid robots, then close the laptop and return to suburban New Zealand. What does living between those two worlds do to your perspective on where all of this is heading?
It depends on the day. Sometimes I feel really compelled to get on a plane and go to SF and jump in a Waymo and be part of that world and live it properly and deeply. And sometimes I feel like I am under-servicing my clients if I am not living in that bubble with them. But most of the time, I feel more like the objectivity and the distance is part of the benefit that I bring. I know a lot of tech founders talk about working towards or building a future of abundance and about what that looks like, what tech can enable humanity in the coming years. And I think, bizarrely, where I'm based, living on the beach in Mount Maunganui, is a tiny version of what that could look like.
What's one piece of advice you would have for either a founder or a business leader that they can take away from today's episode?
I mean, it's the things that I just always say. You are not your customer. Go and find out what they actually want and just have the bravery to have some level of conviction and to be specific. Specificity is so important. And I think that drives so much value. Strategy is sacrifice. I say that to every single client. And it's really hard getting to that prioritized perspective of who you are. It can be really painful prioritizing one audience over another or one product over another, but that is the essence of strategy, quite literally. And I think it's really important to spend the time to do that. And it's something that only you can do. I don't think you can outsource it to a marketing team or an LLM or to an agency. I think as a founder, you need to be the one driving that conversation, obviously with great creative or strategic support, but you need to invest the time and the energy into understanding what makes you different and really getting quite specific about your value. Once you've done that, then it unlocks everything from there.
What I find fascinating is that despite working with technology that feels like it belongs in the future, so much of the challenge comes back to very human fundamentals. Making choices, turning complexity into something people can understand and care about. Have the discipline to decide what you want to stand for, and having the confidence to be distinctive at precisely the moment when technology is making it easier for everyone to look increasingly alike. George, thanks again for your time.
Thank you so much, Adam. Loved your questions, loved the conversation, and look forward to chatting again.